I'm going to introduce these two lovely ladies. Hi down there. On my left here is Gwen Young. I think most of you know her here in Somerset. And Sandy Adams. They're going to do the program on Nellie, Sheridan, Wilson. My name's Chris Wilson. I'm no relation to Zach Wilson, I'm sure, I've known both of these people for a long time. I've been around a long time. It's a real. I think it's going to be a real good program, and everybody sit back and enjoy it. Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear the bell?
Yes. Can you guys hear the bell?
Just barely, yeah.
Faintly.
Yeah, that's good.
It's raining so loud. I mean, really?
We can hear it. That's good, thank you. We got it.
Thank you for coming. We were ringing the bell for Nellie Sheridan Wilson. On the day she died, in 1947, they rang the bells in town. And I think it's only fitting that since we have a program about Nellie, we ring the bells again. And I'm taking Tom Johnson's place because he had a conference and couldn't come. But he wants all of us to know this is officially Nellie Sheridan Wilson Day. You know, I see so many of you are looking at our little booklets. Thank you very much. The little booklet would not have existed had not Deb and several other people said, well, why don't you do a program about Nellie Sheridan? And I thought, no, do that. And then the thing sort of grew, you know. And then in the night on March 1st, I thought, oh, gee, well, if I'm going to do that, why wouldn't a little booklet be nice? And the proceeds from the booklet goes to support this type of program. So, I think you will enjoy the program, but I will have to tell you a bit about the book. You have heard, have you not, that if the United States government makes a mistake in minting a coin or a mistake on a stamp, they immediately stop producing it, but the price of the mistake goes up, right? This little book happens to have some mistakes in it. Just lost it. Thank you, Mike. This book has a few mistakes in it. Now, some of the mistakes came about because I read one date someplace and then found a conflicting date someplace else. And this is true, the more I went into it, the more, I don't know whether there's been an official study about how messy history can be. But any mistakes, just make this one more valuable, because we will be doing a second one that will be enlarged because so many people helped with this and brought in extra material. But since we only have, 3 weeks to do this, and we couldn't add that material. So we will be adding more. Look for our future copy. I'm going to use this for a guideline for myself. There. I named it Ahead of Her Time. Nellie Sheridan was certainly a woman ahead of her time. And we've put this little account together with bits and pieces from here and there. Little story here, and remember, those stories, some of those stories originated a century ago. Who knows how many times they have been repeated? And possibly, remember that old kid's game of gossip? You know how that goes? So you just take it, this is the way we heard it. Okay. The little house that Nellie and her sister Mary were born in is, of course, the Sheridan house on Sheridan Avenue. And her parents were John and Mary Gallen Sheridan. And John being the younger brother of Philip, a great, great big man, as large as Philip was small. But that's where both girls were born, and then shortly after that, they moved into the house where Brenda and Doug lived when it was being put on the National Register of Historic Sites. Both houses are on the National Register. And now we have my son Dennis and his wife are living in that house. But at any rate, those are the two houses, and then there's a third Sheridan house that we have here in Somerset. And that's the one that Lynn Novak currently lives in. It is the house that was, it's a house that one of Sheridan's, that Philip's sisters found the plans in Godey's Ladies' Book. And she mentioned to Philip that it would be a fitting house for the parents of an officer. And he thought so too, and of course built that house, and I know all of you have seen it as you go out of town. And even though they added to it, it's still a perfect example of Steamboat Gothic. It has all the little curly cues and fancy. They are still kept there, and even when they added on to the house, you know, they kept the essence of that Steamboat Gothic style. Now, grandmother Mary Megan Sheridan. Now that's Meeghan. And I'm not sure about how to pronounce it if I were Irish. Does anyone here know the proper pronunciation of the Lee in Irish? Well, we'll call it Megan then. She has been described as a feisty little Irish Catholic woman, straight from Ireland. And she is indeed, perhaps, this is a quote, perhaps the only person that Philip could not bamboozle in his lifetime. She was quite outspoken one time when she was walking up the steps of Holy Trinity. Someone said to her, "Oh, Mrs. Sheridan, you must be very proud of your son, Philip." The reply was taught, "Indeed, and I am just as proud of my son, Michael." Michael happened to be Philip's military aide during the Civil War. Now, missed a page here. All right. When Nellie was visiting her grandmother, evidently the girls spent a lot of time there. You know, Mary Sheridan also collected teapots. And in my mind, I can just imagine Mary and her sister Nellie visiting, going down the hill, visiting grandmother, and don't you imagine that she would serve tea to them from one of her favorite teapots? Nellie the girls must have spent quite a bit of time with their grandmother. In fact, that's where Nellie was when she received a diamond ring. Now, the diamond ring was from Thomas Charles Wilson. And his family had a men's clothing store right across from Underwood. I think most of you here are familiar with the little town, okay. Across the street from Underwood's, that is now the drive-through for the bank. That was Wilson Men's Clothing Store. And I have from a good source, that is Jim, my husband. Well, he's 93 and he does remember a lot of things. But he said Wilson's store was a store that every young man bought his suit from when he graduated. So, important store in town. At any rate, after Nellie received the diamond, she thought maybe she should test it. And the only way she could think of to test a diamond, you know it, use a diamond to scratch on the glass, right? So she went upstairs. She went upstairs in this little house right here. This is a picture of the house before it was added on. And upstairs, I should let Lynn tell you about this. Lynn, what can you tell us about this?
About the picture that,
Tell us what Nellie put up there.
oh, well, my husband could have told it much better, but, he would talk about, how, even in those days, women weren't always sure, that men were being honest with them when they were courting them, So when she got this diamond, she went upstairs to the bedroom upstairs and scratched her name and the date of when she got the ring. So it's etched in the window. It's been there since I'm not sure what the date is, 1887?
With the dime.
1887.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in this little booklet. It has the house that Lynn lives in and the upstairs window and the Nellie Sheridan, which is very easy to read when you're looking at it, but not so easy to get a picture of.
No, not at all, not at all.
So,
And I did bring the newspaper where they had taken the picture that you can see in that frame too. But you did a good job of taking a picture of it for the book, but that's where we got the picture from too. So.
but it's a charming little story, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Now, from a very young age, no, I'm going to move back over here. This one. From a very young age, Nellie was interested in everything. She was really an ardent Democrat, and this in years before women could even vote. But she attended every Democratic activity that went on. Nellie was there. Nellie was was interested in the schools. She did many things for the children, and she had no children of her own. But if there was an activity going on, you better believe Nellie was there. So she has been a staunch, stalwart supporter of Somerset over the many years. Now, I would like to read a little bit. The historic town of Somerset rejoices in a woman postmaster whose name recalls a commanding figure in American history, whose long tenure of service can be accounted for only on the merit in the performance of her official duties. Now, she was appointed postmaster in 1889. She served in that until 1937, I think, but you can also read 35. So somewhere in there. She had a long tenure, but it wasn't always smooth, In talking about women postmasters, I always heard that Nellie was the first woman postmaster. Right? Have you heard that?
Yes.
I put that down in the book. You know what? That's wrong. Now, she was 19, except in one place I read she was 18. But she still holds the record for the youngest. But Mr. Cushing, in 1893, listed all the women postmasters, they call them postmasters then, in the United States, and there were, over the years, there had been some 6,000 of them. The first one being Mary Aileen Goddard of Baltimore, Maryland, in 1775, before we were even an independent country. And he says, Mr. Cushing says, a whole book could be written about the many admirable women postmasters who work away with all their tact and business prudence, trying to please their patrons and the department alike, and pleasing both because they try. Sometimes they are the most important persons in their town. And that's quite true. Because when Jim and I travel around, we go to a little town, where do we go? We go into the post office. We find out where we can park. We find out what's going on in town this weekend. Anything you want, if you go to the post office, now they won't give you someone's address, but they are certainly among the most important people in town. Now, I told you about Thomas Charles Wilson. Thomas, and I don't know why they call him Thomas, Tommy, but his health was always tentative, never very good. And in 1913, remember the rain, 1887? Okay, in 1913, he was diagnosed as having Bright's disease. And so the couple decided they should get married. All right, so they had to get a dispensation from the Catholic Church to be married. They decided to have a simple wedding in Nellie's home, in the parlor. The wedding was to be August the 13th. And Catherine Bennett, many of you may remember Catherine Bennett. Catherine Bennett she'd have been a cousin to Nellie. But at this time, she was a little girl, and she said her mother washed her and dressed her and put on a pretty white dress. They lived at the edge of town. They walked uptown on this August day to Nellie's parlor, and Catherine and her mother witnessed the wedding. And then Thomas died on their wedding night. But ever after that, Nellie signed her name, Nellie Sheridan Wilson. Now, when Nellie decided that she was going to get married, she would, and this is a really kind of confusing, because in one place it says she submitted her resignation. And then another one says she had not yet submitted her resignation. But when they knew Nellie wasn't going to be postmaster, at least 3 people. I want to read you a little bit from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. It says, well, maybe you can see this. This is a copy. And it says, women upset dope with 3 men, neck and neck. General Sheridan's niece is a dark horse. New Lexington, Ohio. Residents of Somerset, Perry County are asking, who is going to be the postmaster of that village? There were 3 applicants, all Republicans. Remember, she was a Democrat. Maybe that's the reason the Republicans were going to get in office. I don't know. E.P. Matthews, insurance dealer, Wheeler Williams, mail clerk, and C.M. Brink, former representative from Perry. And it looked like a cinch for Williams until the women opened up their battery against him. He was endorsed by the county executive committee and certified to the powers that be. But then the fun began. That's the end of it. Nevertheless, the Cincinnati Enquirer on September 31st, 1913 stated, "Artillery is placed to fight to keep the niece of Sheridan and John, Mrs. Nellie Sheridan, niece of the late General Philip Sheridan, who has been deposed as postmistress of Somerset, Perry County, Ohio, by Postmaster General Burleson on the ground that her marriage in early September automatically worked to cut her off from the government payroll." And by the way, she got $1,800 for her annual salary in 23. All right, Senator Burton. Now wait, find something. These pages don't turn well. Senator Burton, wrote to the Postmaster General asking for a full statement of facts in the case. Should Mr. Burleson fail to comply with the senator's satisfaction, he will offer a resolution in the Senate demanding the information. Now listen, this gal is a fighter, this Nellie Wilson. She's not going to take this sitting down, is she? She's gone to the senator, and she's gone to the Postmaster General. This lady knows what she's doing. Okay. On April 14, 1914, from Washington, D.C., a newspaper under a little column called Pithy Paragraphs of News, you can read this. "Another twist has been given to the Somerset Post Office by the refusal of Nellie Sheridan Wilson to refuse to resign, with the understanding that Mrs. Wilson would resign and thus settle the question as to whether she changed her identity in the few hours that she was married to her late husband." That time, the nomination of William F. Gordon was sent to the Senate by the Post Office Department. But now the widow refuses to separate herself voluntarily from the government payroll. And Senator Burton is not inclined to permit the confirmation of Gordon. You know, Gordon wasn't even mentioned in the other one. So he's the fourth one that's running for it. He was not inclined to permit the confirmation of Gordon until there is a vacancy in the office. Now, you know, that woman was a fighter, wasn't she? She took it all the way to the Senate and the Postmaster General. And good for her, because after all, here are 4 men that want that job. In 1893, Nellie's uncle Mike Sheridan, this is the one that, right. Mike Sheridan was near Chicago, and he enjoyed Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. And he prevailed upon the showman to send tickets to his nieces in Somerset, Ohio. And by the way, the tickets and the letter are right here. There are several things that from the Wild West show. Well, in due time, a letter arrived from Wild Bill. Thank you. There, and show it, yeah, that's it. The letter arrived from Wild Bill, and it included a ticket for a box seat for 6. Now I know that Nellie and Mary went, and I know they had the letter and things like that. But I don't know whether they were the only 2 in the box for 6 or someone else went with them. I don't know. But I'll bet you they had fun watching those Indians and the trick riders and the roping contest and all of those good things. And while they were there, not very far from Chicago, is Fort Sheridan. And that happens to be, it was for a long time the only fort that the person that the fort was named for was alive. Usually they would give the fort the name of someone some officer that had died. But this was named for Sheridan while he was still alive, and he was able to attend the dedication ceremony at Fort Sheridan. And there is also a statue of Sheridan. So I do that Mary and Nellie got to go out to Fort Sheridan and see that statue of their uncle. Nellie had a dream. Nellie's dream was to see a statue of her uncle on the square in Somerset. And she talked to influential people and mentioned it every time she had a chance. She penned letters. She even had the Honorable Thomas Binkley submit a monument bill number 368 to the Senate. And they formed a monument committee. The committee minutes of August the 4th, 1905, list Nellie Sheridan as president, and a motion by Leo Stanton that Nellie F. Sheridan serve as secretary. And that motion carried. Now, can you imagine how excited she was as she saw samples of some of these right here, Sandy, samples that were submitted by various sculptors. She was the one that made the final decision that we should use the Carl Hebert example that we have on the hall and up on the square. And I have also heard that Gutzon Berglund did it, but I think it was Carl Hebert according to this. So, you know, take your choice. If you don't like one, just use the other name. It's history. We make mistakes. On November, let's see, the covered statue arrived on the train, and the word went out from the train station that they would need at least 16 horses to pull this heavy statue from the hill uptown. I don't know whether it came on the railroad station here or the railroad station going towards Zanesville. I don't know. That's never been made clear that I've read. At any rate, on the appointed day, 30 horses showed up with their teams, with big, strong workhorses, to pull that, have the honor of pulling that monument up to the top of the hill. Now, here, I'm backtracking a little bit. You know, any statue that size, that's 8 inches high, any statue that size and that weight needs a pretty massive granite base. They didn't have granite base. But Nellie came up with the idea of having the school children collect pennies. So that's what they did. They paid for the base with pennies that the school children had collected. And they selected a school child. I think it was a second grader, but I'm not really sure about that. But the school children, or the selected school child, would pull the ripcord that would drop the shroud on the appointed day. And they kept it really covered, you know. No one knew what it was going to look like. It was completely covered. Then, on November 5th, 1905, on that festive day, not only local and county officials came, but representatives from Washington, D.C. and around the world, and military personnel from both the U.S. Army and from coming from Europe came over. And there were speeches, and there were bands, and it was one big exciting day. And here's show this. Lynn had a picture of that's a picture of the unveiling. But it was a really exciting day. There's one local story, again, local story, that said all the young men in town had a pocket full of pennies. And on that day, they were tossing pennies to see who could get their penny into the general's upturned hat. And it says the hat was filled. And I know from personal experience, there have been other times. Especially, I think every mayor in Somerset, as graduation day grows near, puts the town marshal on the alert. Because there have been various times when flowers have been planted in the general doctrine. Things of that sort. That seems to be one of the big things to do, you know. But it's, let's see. Oh, and there's another story. You know, if you look at that picture, you see the women with all our big hats, you know. Well, every woman in style wore a big hat. Well, Mrs. Yarnell, whose husband owned the hardware store that's Underwood's now, Mrs. Yarnell had young children. And Mrs. Young had young children. And they said, well, our kids won't be able to see anything because of all those hats. So they decided they would go upstairs in Yarnell's and let the kids look out the window. Then they could see it. Now, one of the little boys was Gordon, that some of you might remember him. And he decided, the rest of the kids were smaller, so he's going to tell all the kids that when the shroud drops, that horse is going to fly away with the general. And he said he convinced them all, but some of the kids just said, well, we didn't believe him anyway. William Drake, who wrote the book Little Phil, and I didn't bring them. I was going to bring, we don't have any to sell anymore, but William Drake wrote this book, Little Phil, and if you haven't read it, it's the story of the general from a different point of view. It's a very readable one. William Drake, the author of the book Little Phil, generously allowed the use of his memories and materials from his book. His mother, Kate Gallen, was a first cousin of the Sheridan sisters. Even though she and Nellie were 35 years apart, they were unusually close because Ruth Gallen, Kate's mother, died when Kate was a young teenager. And Nellie and Mary patiently reared their younger cousin. That bond continued even after the younger cousin married and moved to Columbus, Ohio. And Brenda has brought me a letter that they found up in the attic of their house. They lived in the house before. Up in the attic of the house is dated what, 1870? And it's from it's to dear cousin Nellie. And it's kind of interesting because she tells a little bits of information, and then the last phrase says, destroy this letter. I don't know exactly what she did, but at any rate. William and his mother frequently came to Somerset to check on their older cousins, even after they were living in Columbus. And when they came, there were no little kids in the neighborhood to play with. So Nellie would spend hours telling him stories. She must have been a marvelous storyteller, because you see, even in her obituary, it talks about her storytelling. And she must have remembered every story verbatim that her uncles Mike and Philip told her. But Nellie would entertain him with vivid stories of his Uncle Mike and Phil. Nellie would spend hours proudly telling of their exploits during those tragic times. The home was a museum dedicated to her favorite movies. The walls were hung with pictures of the greats of that era and all the men who served beside them. Best of all, in a young boy's mind, was the battered trunk at the head of the stairs. Nellie would open it and allow him to revel in the precious load of moth-eaten blue uniforms, a battered battle flag and tarnished metal, an Indian headdress, and a peace pipe, and he was allowed to wear them all. Now that story of the old moth-eaten battle jacket has a sequel. Joshua Sill of Coshocton and Philip were classmates at West Point, and they both served during the Civil War under General Grant. Well, later during the Civil War, when they, on a hot day, the conference was taking place in a home someplace, Grant had called. So when the officers went in, they took off their coats and put them to one side on such a hot day. And after the conference was over, they grabbed their coats and took off for wherever. Now, inadvertently, Sheridan and Sill exchanged coats. Sill was later killed, and he was killed in battle, and his clothing was sent back to his family in Ohio, Coshocton, Ross County. Well, many years later, the family gave that coat, along with other things, to the Ross County Museum. Well, in 2000, I think it must have been 2005, because we were celebrating the Uptown, celebrating the 100th anniversary. But at any rate, they brought that jacket back and displayed it. Both jackets, they got two of them. They have Sheridan, and they ended up with, and Nellie ended up with Sills. Now, in the early 1940s, someone knowing about the mix-up of jackets contacted Nellie. And Nellie thought there was to be an exchange of jackets, so she would have her uncle's jacket. And Sills would have the jacket that their Civil War soldier had had. And no one knows exactly what happened, but Ross County ended up with both of them. And William Drake said that Nellie was very, very upset. But he thought maybe she misunderstood. But Ross County brought that back for the 2005. And I know David Snyder, for one, was really intent on trying to get that jacket to come back to Perry County. However, the director of the Historical Society in Ross County said no, they will not do that, no way. He brought it for us so we could see it, but it's still in Ross County. Too bad. After Nellie's retirement from the Postal Service and Mary's death in 1944, or it could have been 1946, I've seen both dates, Nellie moved to Columbus to live with her cousin, Kate Gallen Drake, thus completing a warm family circle. I came to Somerset. I was walking around the square, and the bell started tolling. And I saw people, stop and look up, and some of them cross themselves. And so after the bell stopped, I walked over to a lady who had crossed herself and asked, why are the bells ringing? And she looked at me and said, oh, it tolls the knell of Nellie Sheridan Wilson. She has just died in Columbus. There you go, folks. I want to call your attention to this. Deb, tell them about this.
It's a postcard. It's a commemorative postcard. It's about Nellie Sheridan. And it explains a little bit about the history behind it, but the date is wrong. And That's my fault. But it's actually taken from which picture of Nellie Sheridan? The same picture.
This one, and I think, is Tommy here? Okay, yeah, Tommy Lucas, we found a little bitty postage size picture, this picture of Nellie, and he blew it up for us. That's the one that she used here.
Those are free.
They're free, just have one. You're welcome to them, please
We need to do the drawing.
look around. Most of the things are protected, you have a chance to look at it. And do you all notice these lovely clothes?
Yes.
The Bennett family gave us Nellie Sheridan's clothes that they had. And so Sandy is modeling, well, we don't know what it is. Whether this was a work dress, a dressy dress. One thing I didn't tell you that I wanted to was that Jim, my husband Jim, remembers Nellie Sheridan because she was postmistress when he lived in town during the 20s. Through the week he lived in town with his grandparents. Because in those days, school buses didn't pick up parochial kids. And he'd have had to walk from the farm out there all the way to the hotel. So when he lived here, his job, one of his jobs, besides taking around the eggs and selling them to the neighbors, was to go to the post office. Now, at that time, the post office was right where the hardware store and the library meet, the southwestern inside corner. And if you look the next time you go by the hardware store, you will see steps going up there, but not a door that you can get through. That was where the post office was when Nellie Sheridan was postmistress. And he said, she liked me. And I said, well, what, he's 6 years old, what makes you think that she liked you? And he said, well, every time I went in, she gave me a big smile. Every time I went in to get grandfather's mail, she gave me a big smile. And then he went on to say that Nellie was a flamboyant one. She used her hands a lot, and she talked a lot, and she wore a big hat. Her sister Mary, who was a music teacher, I don't know what school or yet, we'll find out later. But Mary was really quiet, and she wore little hats. That really, from a child's point of view, that was the difference between them. We have here not only these clothes that she was wearing, but we have other clothes of Nellie's up here that you can look at. And then over here, Rob, where are you?
Hey, Rob.
Back corner. Back
Come
on,
on, Rob.
Well, stand up, Rob, and tell them about this display.
I was asked to bring some post office items which I've collected over the years. And so in the big framed item is my great-great-grandfather and his family in front of their home, general store, post office, and B&O railroad station in McCuneville. And the smaller portrait is of him. He served as postmaster there from 1885 until 1911. He was succeeded by his son, Frank, who served from 1911 until 1951 when the post office was closed. There are several stamps. One is a hand, with the wooden handle is a hand cancel, and it was last used on June 10th, 1913, because that's the date that's still wrenched into it. There's my post office box door from the now closed Shawnee Post Office, and the little combination card that goes with it. The lady who last ran the post office, she and I become friendly over the years, even though I lived out of state, and she knew that I was interested in the history, and those actually ended up on eBay. So I wrote the guy and said, I'll bid, but I only want, there's 2 boxes I want, 97, which is my box, and 32, which is my grandmother's. He wrote back, he says, I've got neither one of them. So I thought, well, so much for that. At Christmas time, my dad always gives us, even the big kids, a stocking full of candy. So that Christmas, because the post office closed in December, early December, I went to get my bag of candy and there was no candy in my stocking, but my post office box door was. So she had given it to my father, and he also got my grandmother, so we have 32 and 97. And then there's some documents there when the Shawnee Post Office and the McCuneville Post Office were established. Postmaster positions were very political. You had to be the ruling president's party in order to get into service. And I'm sure that Nellie's relationship to Phil Sheridan is exactly why she was appointed when she was appointed. And then I've been told that the records, I've got postmaster records, but don't seem to suggest that they changed that frequently, but they used to say that if my grandfather was a Democrat, then he was postmaster. If it was a Republican, it was George Gaver. But the records don't show that it crossed back and forth like that. So, but it was very politically oriented. Your name had to go into a senator who then had to suggest you, and your county executive committee had to approve you for it. So it's very political, very, very wrenched up in all those things, as it still is, I guess. We do have in the museum, when we cleaned out the bathhouse, William Welch, Bill Welch was a postmaster here for many, many years. And we did find a couple hand cancels, and there's a large one with Somerset, Ohio, and if any of you have seen like old packages that were sent that had multiple stamps on them, this was a large piece that could be rolled over all those stamps, and it says Somerset, Ohio on each one of those stamps. And those are in the museum, which we dug out when we were cleaning out the bathhouse. We also have a letter carrier bag that was used here in Somerset as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else, John, that that has something to contribute? But I know we have a lot of Somerset people here.
We have the drawing, and the last time we did this, we had Honest Abe Lincoln do a very excellent job of drawing. And I was imposed upon you.
Well, you got this lovely lady up here.
I see her every day. You're honest.
Boy, he's sort of shaking him up.
Yeah, I read Braille. What's your number?
238275.
That'd be something here.
We have a winner.
Oh, right there.
Congratulations.
Gwen, I have a question.
Excuse me?
Why did Nellie wait so long to marry Mr. Wilson? I mean, here she gets this ring in the 1880s and then...
And that's a very good question. And the other, I wondered after Sister Josetta brought me the information that they had applied for a mixed marriage. And that was dated like August. I
Which
think
one was
maybe
not
that had
Catholic?
something.
He was not Catholic.
He was not. And by the way, Nellie did buy after he died, she bought the plot in the Somerset Cemetery. And he's buried in the city cemetery. Nellie and the other Sheridan are in the Holy Trinity. If you go up there and drive up into right beside the church, drive straight back, and probably after you pass the church, on your right, on the left-hand side, you will pass roughly 2 good-sized trees. And at the second tree, if you get out, you will find the Sheridan family. There's Nellie, there's Mary, there are a couple of Marys in there, and a couple of old ones, but hers is just a relatively, small stone there. But, at any rate, today is Nellie Sheridan Wilson Day.
It could also do with the fact that if she did get married, she would have lost that postmistress job. You know, old school, I mean, some of you could probably remember old school. We used to have 2 first grade school teachers in Shawnee that would come to the alumna every year. There was the one who had been the older school teacher, and then the one who came in like when my father started school. And this is the one that most people remember. So she'd come to the alumni and say, "Oh, my kitty, stand up." Well, half the room would stand up. Then this one would stand up and say, "Well, I was the first grade teacher, but when I got married, they made me quit."
Oh.
And so school teachers at one point could not be married women. And so by 1913, that had probably waned a little bit. But certainly in 1887, had she gotten married, she probably would have been kicked out right now. There was rulings. I gave Gwen some stuff I found on the internet about the postmistresses. There were rulings early on that there were to be no female postmasters whatsoever. They did manage to slip through the cracks, and in many, and there have literally been several thousand Catholic sisters who were,
yes.
If many of you remember Frank Flowers, who was his sister, Sister Sylvina, was the postmistress at St. Mary of the Springs. I went to Ohio Dominican. And I have one of his cameras that she gave me because I became very friendly with her when I would go to the nursing home and visit the old nuns. And 2 glass plate negatives and it's in the museum actually. So
Right now, we're talking about old tombstones and things like that. Bertie, why don't you tell them what you're doing in our almanac to come up?
Okay.
There will be a page.
Yes, my name is Berta Lockhart, and
Stand up,
stand
yes.
up so that I can.
Yell at them, you know, make sure. Yell at the back row.
My name is Berta Lockhart, and I'm the president of the Friends of Athens Asylum Cemeteries. And Ms. Gwen allowed us to place a page in her almanac that she has coming up soon, in which we have listed all of the names of the people that are buried at the Athens Asylum cemeteries that are from Perry County. Now, a lot of people wonder, you know, why we want to know about the Athens cemeteries, and one of the biggest reasons is there are 45 counties represented at these cemeteries. It's not just Athens people. So out of the 88 counties in Ohio, 45 are represented there. And all of these people, when we first started this project in 2009, out of like over 2,000 that are there in 3 cemeteries, 1,777 of them are buried with just a number. So our organization has started as a nonprofit and through all volunteers. None of us get paid. Our goal is to place a marker for each one of those individuals with their name, leaving the historical stone in place with a number that was issued by the state, but placing right below it a flat stone with the name, birth year, and death year. And the state of Ohio, the owners of the cemeteries are Ohio Department of Mental Health, and the only way they will allow us to do that is to find current family living descendants of these people that will give us permission and lineage proof. So we have genealogists all over helping us, and Margaret Wilmoth is one of them that does a lot of the work for us, that help us find current family descendants that will give us permission. And we have probably hundreds and hundreds that we've contacted through Ancestry.com, through word of mouth. And so, you know, we hope that the people that in Somerset through the almanac and can look up information on our website, not just the people in Perry County, but some people find relatives that are buried there of people in their family tree that they never knew what happened to them because the family never spoke of them, because the history of them was lost, because once they went into the asylum, back then, they didn't really want people to know that they were there. But the interesting part about that is most of the people that were there were not there due to mental illness. They were there for various reasons. Civil War soldiers were there because of with PTSD. Women were in there because of postpartum depression. Some people were there because of epilepsy. They didn't know what it was back then. They thought it was, possession. And so there were so many people in there that never left, and some unfortunate souls were buried there with just a number, and we feel is unjust. And so our goal is to get everyone a name. So thank you.
So when these people look at our atlas, our almanac that's coming out, our 2014,
Mhm.
you will find a page and it lists all of the Perry County names. So you should go through those. You can't tell. There may be someone there that you know.
Yeah, and
Okay.
then, thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
And our website will give you all the other names that are from all the other counties.
What's your website?
It's faacofOhio.org. And I'll put some cards up here. I think I did nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much for your time.